Welcome to Reddit Aliens. 911 operators of Reddit, what's the most blood-chilling call you've ever received? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe.
My mom has heard everything. She's taken calls about children being abused, rapes, and murders. Nothing gets to her quite like suicide. She's still shaken about one man in particular 4 years after taking his call. A man called and in the most calm, stoic voice said, "I'm going to kill myself." Mom started her normal approach to this and tried to ask him not to do it, ask him what was wrong. He interrupted her immediately and said without emotion, "There's nothing you can do. I made my decision a week ago. I'm going to kill myself today." Gave his location, said, "My wife will be home in an hour. I'll be in my bedroom." He hung up the phone. Mom repeatedly called his number back, but there was never any answer. With each call, she wondered if he did it yet. He could hear his phone ring as he was doing it. He died that day. When the police arrived, he was long gone. His wife arrived right on time, and the police had to explain to her what happened. It was all perfectly planned. It's as if my mom was speaking to someone who was already dead. He was so far gone when he called her, there was nothing she could do. It took her a long time to come to terms with that. Mother calling stating her baby is choking on a coin, can hear the commotion in the back and couldn't do anything. The kid was choking and dying. Don't know what else happened after.
This topic is one of the hardest for me to narrate, and it doesn't get better.
My sister is a 911 operator. She would call my parents whenever she was upset after a call or a day at work. One of the worst ones she told us was about an 8-year-old boy calling from his bedroom because the kitchen and hallway were on fire outside his room. She notified fire department, but knowing the location was rural and it would take them 10+ minutes to get there, she began to try and give instructions on what he needed to do to get out, starting with finding an object to break the window so he could climb out. But between having to calm him down, get the information, keep him calm, and get him to listen to her instructions, he ended up burning to death on the phone with her. A couple of minutes before, help showed up. From that day on, I realized how difficult and strenuous this job actually is, and that I would never be able to do it. Carjacking, where woman was dragged out of the car, but her 3 kids weren't. Got car and kids back 45 minutes later after chase X town, but little girl had been assaulted. Suspect told her he'd kill her little brothers if she screamed. Had a phone call from a distressed father. His son had gone missing and left a note saying he loved his family but couldn't go on living anymore. The call prior to this one was from a railway manager telling me that a train driver had just hit a human. I had already dispatched a patrol car to the area and I'd already heard the report, and it was horrible. My colleague in the particular was on the verge of breakdown, describing the scene. Body parts lay strewn everywhere and an ID was found. Now, knowing this, I put 2 and 2 together and knew that I was talking to a father who had all hopes of finding his son alive again. The son had done similar things before. The father told me that his wife, the dead man's mother, was out looking for the son. I had a radio running in the background so that I could pick up info from the suicide scene, and as I was telling the father that the police would help in the search for the lost son, I heard the most bone-chilling screams that I ever heard. The mother had arrived at the tracks, and I could hear her horrified wailing at what she saw. It was horrible, and I had such a hard time holding back tears and keeping my tone straight and civil. The father thanks me for the help I could and hang up the call. I was not allowed to give the father the news, and frankly, it is just not something to deliver in a phone call. Their son was dead and gone. The father had to be kept in the dark until my patrol car could give him the news, and the mother was utterly heartbroken. Her desperate wailing on the radio, it knots my stomach to this day. Been dispatching for 8 years. I work in a very rough area, taking a lot of messed up calls, shootings, suicides, and whatnot. Nothing is worse than SIDS. Having to calm down a parent that just found their baby unexpectedly deceased, get them to tell you their address, and give them CPR instructions that you both know won't help is probably the hardest thing to handle. Having 2 kids of my own, it's moments like this I pull out my phone, look at their photos, and text home to make sure they're okay.
Is there an age that you think is appropriate to start this type of training?
The one that stuck with me was a 911 hang-up. Starts out as an abandoned call, as in a call where the caller hung up before we could answer. Call back, and when I get an answer, they calmly explain that their cousin had called and that there was no emergency. Right before she hangs up, I hear a cry of "help" in the background. To be absolutely certain, I have the operator next to me listen to the recording and confirm that there was a cry for help in the background. Unfortunately, this was a call that came from a cell phone, so automatic location information is not a given, and despite an attempt to call back and get wireless Phase 2 information, it is unsuccessful. So I call the phone company's corporate security team, which is responsible for assisting us in such cases. It's unfortunate that it takes something like half an hour to get through the necessary authentication steps, but they are able to give us an address for the subscriber and a last available GPS location in this case. The two locations were close together. The GPS coordinates came back near a creek behind a school, the address a house about half a mile away. A typical response for a 911 hang-up is one officer who will casually drive through the area with the windows down. If anyone needs help, they can approach them, or the officer will hear any signs of an emergency. This one got 3, a road patrol unit, the student resource officer, and for the school, the GPS coordinates came back near, and the watch commander. They were out in the area for about half an hour looking, tried knocking on the subscriber's address door, and went out on foot to the creek but found nothing. Maybe it was never really anything. Maybe the person who answered the phone was telling the truth. I'll never know. I was a dispatcher for about 4 years in a rural county. The worst call I got was a hunting accident. A guy took his 6-year-old son out hunting with him and gave the kid a loaded rifle to carry with him. The kid, while trying to get through tamarack bushes, grabbed the weapon by the barrel and dragged it behind him. The weapon got caught on a branch and discharged into the kid's head. The father called 911, got me, and didn't know where he was at, as he wasn't familiar with the area and it wasn't his land. All he could tell me was that they had passed a lake or pond on a dirt road. There are several dirt roads with ponds, and I was able to narrow it down to 6 roads with the location data from the cell towers. This was the early 2000s, and triangulation in rural areas sucked. Not sure how much better it is now. And his information. I dispatched every deputy I had on duty, all 2 of them, the 1 city cop I had on duty, and both our ambulances and fire trucks to the areas. State Patrol also assisted with the search. It took us over 20 minutes to find them, and the whole time the father wept uncontrollably, screaming, "Please don't be dead," over and over again through the instructions I gave him from the flip chart to check his vitals, try to stop the bleeding, etc. My instructions only lasted about 5 minutes, and I had given all the information I was trained to give. The remaining 15 felt like an eternity, and from what the father told me, and what I was told by the deputies after, he was pretty much dead immediately after the accident. The EMTs still went through with their routines and loaded the kid in the ambulance because none of them felt comfortable doing otherwise in that situation. This was the first shift back after the birth of my son, so I think that's why it sticks with me. 2 off the top of my head. Car crash where the caller says, "Hey, this guy is bleeding from his head. You guys need to hurry up. Can you put pressure on it to stop the bleeding?" "Nah, I don't want to get involved." The guy died. Trying to talk to an 18-year-old son, calling because his dad was just shot in the head randomly by their drunk roommate. Mom comes downstairs to see what the commotion is. Total chaos. Didn't happen to me, but a coworker I used to work for a company like Life Alert. The person who rang was quadriplegic, and there was a house fire. The fire truck didn't make it in time. They said the screams messed him up so much that he couldn't take another call and move to IT. I still get chills thinking about it. Suicides are the worst, and way more common than people might think. A few days before Christmas 2017, we got a call from a father who woke up and found his 15-year-old daughter hanging in the basement. To make matters worse, officers revived her, but the loss of oxygen left her brain dead. Her parents ultimately had to decide to take her off life support, like losing your child twice. I was the caller in this case, but when I was 12, I woke up to my dad, single parent, making strange sounds. I walked into his room to find him sat at his computer, eyes open, blood trickling down his chin, non-responsive. One of the most horrifying experiences of my life. Immediately called 999, and British. Operator was a champ and did a great job of keeping me calm until ambulance arrived. Paramedics managed to wake him and took him to hospital. Turns out he'd had a seizure. The blood was from where he'd bit his tongue. He continued to have seizures for a few years after that, caused a lot of permanent mental issues such as memory loss. Turns out quitting alcohol cold turkey after being a moderately heavy alcoholic for years will F you up. Alcohol withdrawals are a bitch. Almost 8 years, I have heard a lot. Kid hiding into the bed while daddy punches mommy. I saved a man from suicide and possibly from killing others in the process. Lots of others. Had a van hit a guy on a motorcycle, he went through the windshield and out the back window. Not a 911 operator, but when I worked for the district attorney, we had a case of domestic violence where the perpetrator was holding a baby only a few weeks old and threatening to twist his effing head off if his wife didn't come back home. The mother's screams as she begged and pleaded for him not to hurt the baby stayed with me for a long time. Eventually, the police arrived. Baby was returned to mother, and the perpetrator went to prison. Good. Even though I knew the outcome after the fact, we were evaluating the tape for evidence. Listening to the tape was difficult. Not the dispatcher, but the caller. My younger sister's bedroom door was locked, and she hadn't responded to my mom yelling from downstairs to do chores. Maybe an hour later, my dad got some tools to unlock the door. From my room, I heard as he finally got in and went in. I heard a crash and thought he'd fallen, and he immediately yelled for my mom. My brother came out of his room to see what was going on, and my mom came in, a towel, having just gotten out of the shower. In her room, my parents started screaming her name over and over. My mom screamed to call 911. I emerged from my room, really it was like 10 seconds since the beginning. I walked by the doorway without looking in and said, "I'll do it." I walked downstairs and out the front door because their screams filled the house. I called 911, and when a woman answered, I said, "I need an ambulance." I could still hear my parents' hysterical screaming. She asked the reason for needing an ambulance, and I said my sister was unconscious in her bedroom. She asked if I knew why or how, and I didn't. I hadn't even looked in the bedroom when I walked by. I learned later my dad had tried to revive her with CPR. The operator asked for a cross street, and I hesitated. I wasn't sure what cross street meant, though my guess would have been correct. My brother came outside and I handed the phone to him, hoping he could answer more clearly. I felt guilty for not having all the answers, not using the landline, not looking in the bedroom to even see what was wrong with her to better describe to the operator. I thought maybe if I hadn't hesitated about the cross street, help could have arrived earlier and my sister would have lived. Now I know this isn't true, but it bothered me a long time. A movie called Life in a Day came out in 2011. It is about people all around the world living their life on a specific day. By coincidence, it is the exact day my sister died. It was comforting in a way to see what other people were doing that day. They were having a good day, and the world didn't stop. My sister is a 911 dispatcher. She went on leave after this. A man called in saying he had shot his daughter and her 6 kids, age infant to 11. He said that when police arrived, he would kill himself. Dispatch arrived and he killed himself in front of them. Police found the daughter out back. They think she was leading him away from the house and kids. Kids were throughout the house. They had tried to hide. The 11-year-old was with the baby. No one knows why, and it was a small town. It hit everyone in the community pretty hard. I was on the third side of a call as a firefighter responding to a report of a house fire in a very rural area. It was about a 30-minute run for us, and we would be meeting up with another station coming from the opposite direction at about the same time. About 15 minutes into the drive, dispatch came over the radio saying that the call came from inside the house. Upon arrival, we roll up to multiple police cars and 2 ambulances on scene, meaning someone knows something we don't. The house is sealed up with heavy black smoke puffing from every tiny opening. This is a telltale sign that the compartmentalized gases are ready to explode. Backdraft. Once oxygen is added to the superheated environment. It was mid-January, minus 20 degrees Celsius outside, and the roof was steeply pitched and made of steel that happened to be covered in ice. Basically, we were ventilating from above as we would prefer. We took a front window and made entry through a side door, found 2 bodies and got them out before the place erupted. We dumped water into it for hours, but without proper ventilation, we simply couldn't dissipate the heat fast enough to prevent it from reigniting. We found out the next morning that a dude had shot up his family and set the place on fire. We had to go back later that day and find the 3rd body, who looked more like the remains of Luke Skywalker's aunt and uncle after the stormtrooper attack. She was in her 90s, and the one who had called 911.
To all emergency personnel, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for what you do.
Not a dispatcher, but I was a police officer in a rural area, working night shift mainly. One night, I responded to a call of a head-on motor vehicle accident, occupants trapped in their vehicle, no further details. It was winter, and the milepost was a good 10 to 15 miles away, and even running code 3, the adrenaline dump doesn't get you there fast enough. It wasn't snowing down in the valley, but when I emerged up on the flats, I hit a wall of snow and ice covered roads at 110 miles per hour. I was lucky and was able to slow down before I became the next crash. I was the first to arrive on scene. One vehicle, SUV, on its side, and the other, a truck, was partway in the ditch but upright. I ran straight to the SUV, where I noticed a woman screaming with a baby. They had managed to crawl out of the vehicle with the help of the other drivers who had stopped. I noticed the driver was pinned under the dash and front fender, arm partially hanging out the window, unresponsive. Bystanders told me there was a 12-year-old girl trapped inside the vehicle. The mother was screaming to the girl inside, "Mommy's here, baby." I climbed on top of the rolled vehicle and opened a back door so I could get access to the girl. I climbed inside where she was laying head-to-head with the driver, if you can imagine the chaos of the interior of a wrecked vehicle. I remember climbing over her, the stench of death and the go-to box of whatever they just ate scattered across the inside. I told her to take my hand. Everything would be okay. I'll never forget reaching down as her small, bloody hand extended up to take mine. All I could do was keep her focused on me. The driver, her father, dead just inches from us. I checked his pulse, but there was nothing. I comforted the girl while my partner pried open the rear hatch so we could get her out. Once she was out of the vehicle, I went back to the driver from the outside driver's area. He was clearly gone, too pinned to attempt CPR. His internal injuries had to be severe. The woman, his wife, was screaming and crying. She went over and bent down, yelling at him, "You can't be gone. You can't be gone. This isn't happening." I tried to comfort her, and I put my arm on her and walked her in the opposite direction. I told her we were doing everything we could. She was mad, upset, confused. She yelled at me, "You weren't doing anything. You weren't helping him." She was in shock and didn't want to believe her husband was gone. I often remember that night and her voice. I'm not ashamed to admit I've cried many times over that call. I'm thankful the children and the wife made it out alive, as well as the other driver who caused the accident. I always wonder how the family has moved on and how the girl is doing. For some reason, this one just sticks with me.